I've always been a fan of roguelite games. They've always been really enjoyable for me. Back before I built my first PC, I played almost all my games on my college laptop and couldn't really play a lot of AAA games. But I could always play roguelite games like Binding of Isaac, anything that was 2D, because it wasn't really that graphically intensive. So I knew that when PlayStation announced Returnal that I really wanted to hop in and check it out. And yes, I know that this review might be a little bit late, but I wanted to review the game a few months later to see what all is updated and to share my thoughts with you all. So yeah, let's talk about that. Returnal was one of the big PS5 exclusives that came out in 2021, and it was made by House Marquee Studios. I honestly had never really played any of their other games, but I always heard really good things about them. And from what I know, they're generally known for like 2D bullet hell type games with a ton of particle effects and projectiles, and even they dabbled in some like isometric shooter games as well. And from what I've seen, they've really taken their style of game and really adapted it well to be a 3D action roguelite. In Returnal, you play as Celine and you're stuck in a weird time loop where you crash landed on an alien planet. As you go through the game, you start to unravel the mystery of why you're there and start to uncover how Celine's past plays a part in your overall story. There is a pretty good sense of mystery here and a lot of horror elements when learning about her story. It does really give off PT vibes when you're traversing your childhood home because it moves from the standard third-person 3D action game to a more first-person experience. And you really do get a lot out of the narrative when you're in those sections. But really, I don't think the narrative is the focus of the game. In most roguelike games, I don't really feel they have a compelling narrative to push you forward. And Returnal really isn't an exception to that. I'm not saying the narrative is bad. I found the mystery of why you're stranded on the planet to be really interesting, but at the rate at which you uncover the mystery and get little bits of dialogue and narrative are pretty slow because you have to progress far enough into a run to unlock a narrative bit for your subsequent runs. There are also audio logs you can find throughout your runs to supplement some of those PT first-person segments, but other than that, the game relies heavily on its combat and roguelike elements to push you to keep playing, and that's where I really got hooked. The combat does have a lot of depth that I really want to talk about, and it's probably the most compelling reason to keep playing. Returnal, like I said, is a third-person shooter and roguelite where you initially don't have a huge arsenal of weapons and power-ups. You progressively get more abilities as you keep playing, and there are a few ways to unlock these. There's a permanent currency called Ether that you can pick up and buy new power-ups at the start of a run, and that currency persists throughout all of your runs, and it's the only one of your currencies that does. Other than that, most power-ups and weapons you unlock are found while doing runs and progressing through the different biomes of the game. And weapon unlocks are pretty consistent the further in a run you get. You get a new weapon per biome once you explore enough of it and make it far enough. There aren't a ton of weapons in the game, but each one feels really unique and can have different statistics, buffs, attributes, and an alt-fire ability. Whenever you pick up one of the guns in the game, all of its properties are randomized. There is an overall level rating your gun will have, and that's determined directly by your weapon proficiency level. And you gain that weapon proficiency level whenever you continue through your run and keep killing enemies. And one of the coolest things about the weapon system and game design is how House Marquee decided to leverage the power of the DualSense. This is a PlayStation exclusive game, and I'm really happy it is because of its use of the DualSense. Like most third-person shooter games, you use the left trigger to ADS in aim and the right trigger to shoot. However, with the DualSense's adaptive triggers, if you do a half press on the left trigger, it will ADS, and a full press on the trigger will toggle the alt fire for your gun. This initially took a while to get used to, but overall, I think it makes the combat really fluid. You can go from ADSing and shooting at an enemy to immediately using your alt fire, or vice versa. This is a feature of the game that made it really feel next gen to me. I'd never really played a shooter like that, and honestly, I don't really expect any other game to be able to give that kind of experience if it doesn't have the technology in the DualSense controller. Combat here, because of all of those new systems with the DualSense and all the advancements, is really, really hectic and fun. It gets a lot more hectic and more like a bullet hell game the further on you get, the farther into different biomes you get, and especially when it comes to bosses. And it's just really fun to be able to zip around each of the rooms in a biome and clear it, especially with how the progression and power-up mechanics work in a single run. You're really rewarded for playing well and not getting hit, because there's an adrenaline system that increases in rank the more kills you get without getting hit. The higher the rank, the more buffs you get. The first buff you get, for example, is a higher window for your active reload. You can't reload your guns until you run out of ammo. Then a bar appears and there's a small window where you can overload your gun to reload it faster. You can technically slowly reload your gun if you're not using it, but the best way I found for combat is to use that overload ability to your benefit. And then all of the systems for the gunplay are really well designed and make it compelling to try to play aggressively and while avoiding as much damage as possible. But there is more to combat than just the guns. There are also some negative debuffs and parasites that you get to augment your playstyle. With these parasites and debuffs, it's a really big high risk, high reward situation where some of the items you can get can open special kinds of chests, are gamble to increase your health or heal you. And if you do these things, you do get a chance to get a debuff called a malignancy. And the malignancies will give you a specific debuff and it won't clear until you achieve a specific goal in your run. These goals can vary a lot. Some are just collecting the currency of the game or killing a certain amount of enemies. It really just depends, and it always feels like a risk to gamble for one because you don't know what you're going to get. However, there are ways to clear this. You can achieve the goal like I said, or there are some specific consumables you can unlock if you're lucky enough to be able to remove all your malignancies. So overall, I think the malignancies are pretty benign since most of the time they are temporary and you can find ways to get around them. But the parasites in the game do provide a much more permanent debuff to your character, which I really do like. And the parasites in the game do give you a nice positive buff along with a permanent debuff. And both of those stay with you until you find an item or machine that allows you to remove that parasite. Overall, this really creates a high sense of risk and high sense of reward. You're rewarded for performing well, getting kills, and knowing your environment, but you also have to deal with all of these different negative status effects that you can encounter. All of these mechanics work really well to create a cohesive roguelite experience that I haven't really experienced in a long time. And the roguelite structure for this game is a little different from other roguelites I've played. I've been playing a lot of Hades as well while playing Returnal, and in a standard roguelite like Hades, you have to progress area to area until you reach the end, you reach the final boss. With Returnal, after you beat a boss, you generally unlock an item or an ability where you can progress to that level from the first starting world. If you do go to one of the other levels, I think you kind of can feel under-leveled, because your gun won't have the stats that can do enough damage to enemies. However, at the start of the level, there's an item that will raise your proficiency to a specific level. So if you pick up a gun in that biome, it should have good enough stats so your enemies don't feel like bullet sponges. And that ability to traverse to your farthest point you've gotten to is really nice because runs in this game can last a really long time. Some of my best runs lasted 30 to 45 minutes before dying, but that can feel a little tedious at times, and the biggest downside to the length of those runs isn't the actual length, it's the fact that there's no save feature during a run. I do understand kind of why the developers might not want to have a save while you're traversing a specific biome. So if, for example, if you're traversing the first level. However, I do wish you were able to save if you entered a new biome. This was done in Curse of the Dead Gods, another roguelite game that came out this year. Basically, when you're going through a level, you cannot save until you reach the next one, and then you have a second to save if you want to. And really, this is a big deterrent for me playing the game, because if your game crashes or if your system has to restart, you just lose all your progress for that run. And that's overall a little disappointing for me. But overall, I think the game is in a much stronger place than when it released. The main complaint I have is the lack of a save feature. They have released subsequent updates since I've played the game on release that makes progression a lot smoother. Similar to a Dark Souls game, now you can see the bodies of other players throughout the world who have died. If you do see one of these, you can have the chance to fight a hard mini-boss type monster and gain a few ether. If you decide to farm these different challenges, it definitely speeds up your progression of unlocking new items because you can build up enough ether to basically unlock an item every couple runs. There are also some positive benefits to collecting ether in a run because you can remove the malignancy effect on some of the different items in the game if you have enough ether, and there are some other benefits as well. Overall, ether, it remains a pretty versatile currency in Returnal, and it's nice that they added ways to get it a little easier because it makes the difficulty curve in the game a little easier to swallow since you can pretty consistently upgrade your items and unlock new items. And that makes for a better experience because if you are new to the game or don't have a lot of really good items unlocked and know their synergies, the game can be pretty challenging, especially if you're on a new save and you're leading up to the first boss. I found the game was a pretty big challenge because the guns I had weren't as fun to use for me and I didn't feel were as effective against the bosses. It might have been because I wasn't accustomed to the combat when I played initially, but I definitely felt the difficulty was pretty intense in the first biome and then kind of mellowed out as you started unlocking more items and more weapons as you get into the second biome and beyond. The difficulty curve starts to shift more from facing the hard endgame like biome boss to fighting more difficult enemies overall throughout the world, and they all have kind of different attack patterns and can really affect you a lot more with their different bullets or if they have different AoE attacks or things like that. But overall, I think the enemy design and difficulty scaling are pretty reasonable and provide a good challenge if you like difficult roguelite games. And really, the last thing I want to talk about is whether or not you should go buy a PS5 for Returnal. And honestly, I don't think so. I think Returnal is kind of a niche exclusive. If you don't like roguelite games at all, Returnal will probably not sway you to like roguelites, especially if you don't have enough time to devote to the runs, which, as I mentioned, can take a fair amount of time. If you do love roguelites and want a really challenging experience, I do think it's worth a purchase, especially if you're going to buy a PS5. I know there are a ton of PS5 exclusives coming out towards the end of this year and next year, and I think if you're picking up a PS5 for those games and the gameplay from this video looks fun, I think you'll enjoy it. Honestly, it's a game I keep coming back to, even though I'm really bad at it. I'm continuing to push towards the end game and unlocking more of the biomes, and my overall impressions of the game are really positive. If you're looking for like a one-of-a-kind roguelike, I would really recommend Returnal. I've played a lot of roguelites over the past few years, and honestly, I haven't really experienced anything like this one before. So yeah, those are my overall thoughts on Returnal. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a like and a subscribe to the channel for more review videos. I've got a lot more videos coming up. I can capture gameplay from my PS5 now and everything else. So tune into the next one. It should be pretty good, and I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.